Testing. Can you hear me? Okay. All right.
Okay, all set to go? The work session of Annapolis City Council for Thursday, February 16th, 2023 will be called to order at 3:07. At this time, would everyone willing and able please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. City Attorney, please present the first item. Thank you.
Yes, sir. The first item on the agenda is ID 1023, adequate public facility.
Hello. Do you want to do a little intro on Linda?
Yes, sir. The presenter today is Ms. Linda Schuett, outside legal counsel, assisting the Office of Law with the instruction to review and present proposals for modification of adequate public facility and to draft proposed legislation. Today we'll be discussing primarily, or the first item within adequate public facilities that is drawing some attention, and that is police adequate public facility. And Ms. Schuett is an attorney who has been in Annapolis and Anne Arundel County for quite some time, has great experience with legislative drafting. I did not present her resume because I think everyone is familiar with her, as she served as city attorney for a brief time a few years ago. And most folks are familiar with her on this dais. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start, I saw Alderman Savage has his hand up. Yeah.
Thank you. Just a question, Mr. Mayor. Can somebody just give us a briefing of how this is going to work today, as far as who is here to present on what? Just, is there some kind of a sub-agenda for this meeting so we get an idea of, because at some point I want to hear from the police department, which I don't even see here.
Well, our intent was to have Ms. Schuett lay out the process for how she started in the project, and maybe that will help.
What project? Well, I mean, because I'm sorry, but I thought when we requested this meeting, it was to specifically talk about the police APF, and we wanted to get our heads around that, and that's why I was hoping.
And that's why she's here.
But what about the police department? Are they?
Well, Rhonda is in the back.
I know, but we're going to have questions for the police department too.
Okay, we have Rhonda here.
Well, we have Rhonda here.
I want to talk to the
The
chief.
chief.
Okay, well, you're not going to be able to today, Alderman Arnett. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a point of information as well, or a point of personal privilege.
Yes,
whichever
Alderman
you
Gay.
prefer. Just quickly, I support all of this, but I don't know what is in front of me. I have like 18 different things going on. So this is the draft that's not introduced, but we'll be discussing at some point, which I am in support of. The Title 22 adequate public facilities this just says review criteria and certification for adequate fire. Is this the old code that is this one pager? Just so I can organize things and follow along appropriately. This is so this is the current one, and this is the new proposal.
This is the new proposed police.
Okay.
They're separate sections.
The
And
final document was provided by Cynthia Reuter in our office. She's doing some background
Okay,
research.
yeah, these two that say Office of Law Explainer and okay,
just
perfect.
to give some background on adequate public facilities
Awesome.
around other jurisdictions similar to
Yeah, I
ours.
appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
No decisions are being made here. This is information session. We have the Planning and Zoning Director here. We have the representative from APD who have plenty of knowledge for us. But I think that Linda, one of the first things that she did pretty much on her own was dug into this a little bit just to give us some comparatives. So if you could just present, we'll have some information to do with as we will, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here again. Nice to see all of you.
Turn your microphone, Linda.
Got it.
Microphone.
Okay, is that better? Oh, now I'm really gonna
Stereo.
scream. Better? Yeah, much better. So thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here again. I always like being in the city, and it's nice being in City Hall. And I like to see the people I've known for a long time, as well as some new faces. So what happened was, towards the end of January, we were beginning to talk about doing a contract for me to begin to do some revisions to the code. And while we were in that process, the Capitol talked about the opinion of the Circuit Court, which I read, which made me go immediately to APF to see what it said and whether there were any problems with it. So I'm here today to just give you a handful of some of the problems I think I've seen in the APF ones, and to tell you what I think should be cured with respect to those. But we've only been doing this for about 3 weeks, so I'm going to need a little bit more time to finish a real draft, and after that's done, we will hopefully give you more information on it. But here are some of the highlights of things of what I found. The first thing I found is that no jurisdiction can use APF as a way of stopping development indefinitely. There must be a way to move forward, and that's part of the law. There's got to be, number one, a funding source to remedy the inadequacy, and the remedy needs to occur fairly soon. It can't be forever, and the city's already picked 6 years as the amount of time to get these things done. And the city's code doesn't comply with these two requirements because it says that the remedy should occur within 6 years, but that's not what the law is. The law is that it has to occur in 6 years, or the applicant gets to proceed without respect to the adequacy of public facilities. And the current code also says that the capital improvement should ensure that the remedy will occur within 6 years. Should doesn't make it. This is not gee, it would be nice if we did it. This is a mandatory requirement of the law. So I will be recommending that the should in 2 places be changed to shall. The code as it's written also opens up the city, as well as other jurisdictions, to takings. If the owner, as a result of APF, cannot move forward with a development, and there's no other economic use that could be used for this property, and there's no mitigation possible, then, for example, if there's a piece of property that is zoned mixed use and has been denied adequacy of public facility certificates, and there's nothing else that can go on this property other than this mixed use program or project, and there's no mitigation to allow the development to go forward, this could be a taking for which the government is possibly responsible. So a partial fix to that is to have clearly in the code that an owner or an applicant has the right to go forward with his or her project if after the 6-year period, they still can't meet, they can't do anything, they're stopped by APF. Another thing I noticed right away is that did that make sense? Anybody confused? Another thing I noticed was that most of the provisions in the code say that the directors of the various departments shall promulgate the standards for how you pass or fail APF. But the thing is that unfortunately that promulgation of standards has not occurred everywhere. So that's a problem. The standards aren't shown anywhere for the people who, for our citizens. They won't know what they're supposed to do. And there has been some promulgation of standards, but I don't think that they follow the nature of what promulgation means here. Basically, when this council said that it's the directors who should promulgate the standards, you are basically giving your legislative abilities to the department heads. And when they go ahead and promulgate something, it's like a rulemaking process. What they say will take on the essence of law. It will be mandatory. In other governments that do this kind of thing, they have a whole process for doing it. Promulgation is made, that is advertised to the public. People get a certain amount of time to comment on them. I don't think that has occurred here at any place or any time. Pardon me?
We passed rulemaking legislation that says you look how to promulgate rules, who can promulgate them, and how it's done. And in fact, it comes
Good.
before the Rules and City Government for a hearing. We don't have the power to change the rules. We do have the power to change the code that the rules affect. So we do have that process.
That's great, but it wasn't in place when this was adopted way back when. There was no rulemaking process in the city that I know of. I could be wrong, but as far as I know, that didn't happen. But here's my real point. My real point is that these standards, in my opinion, should be in the code so that anybody can, or someplace where anybody can easily get to them and know what they have to do to pass APF. And the best way to do that is to put them right in the code.
I agree.
So I am working with that, with each of the departments to get, there are some standards in the code, and some of those need revision, but I'm working with each of the departments to go through what they consider to be the correct standards for whichever adequacy of public facility thing is at hand. This also has the benefit of making the standards very transparent. Anybody can see them easily. The standards are clear. There's no ambiguity about it, I hope. And so that will be my recommendation. Moving to fire, the code currently says that a project is completely exempted from all fire, rescue and medical standards, completely exempted if you put a sprinkling system in your project. Well, this was done about 16 years ago when sprinkling wasn't required. Now it is required in almost all projects other than some commercial projects. So it makes absolutely no sense to give those people a complete exemption from all fire standards just because they're doing what the law already requires. That makes no sense. So,
We're doing APF, which is everything, right?
That's not what the meeting was for, but
But it wasn't a meeting just about police, right?
yes, it was. It was for APF for police, and we were to talk to the chief of police. That's what we asked for.
Okay,
Was
you-
a council work session to talk about the APF for police.
Okay, well, let's get this information.
I'm almost finished, if it helps, to make it short. Then there is the whole issue of APF and police officers. And like I said, the circuit court case had made it very clear that there is no way to pass the APF test with respect to the police provisions because there's no mitigation. There's nothing you can do. You have no control over the ratio of police officers to the number of residents, and there's no way to pass. And so, and the code specifically says it's mandatory that the applicant who is denied must be given an opportunity to mitigate. But that's not possible here because there is no mitigation stated in the code, and it's the owner of property has no control over the ratio of police, none. So there are various ways to address this, but the draft bill that is before you is one way. One is to include or increase the definition, revise the definition of
It's right in the code.
police officer to include those police officers who are in the Annapolis Fire Department. That's one part. And the other is to basically allow what the police department has been doing, at least it has done in one case, and that is, although the 3.2 officers per every 1,000 city provision apparently is not included in our budget as states it would be in this code. So the bill just says that if you don't meet the ratio, then the police department may go ahead and require security provisions, security measures such as security cameras, off-duty police officers or private security that in the sole opinion of the police department will meet or exceed the required officer ratio. And what I would say is you may have comments on this and you may think that there's a different way to do it, and that's fine, but there has to be some kind of mitigation for this. You can't leave it as an out and out, no, you're never going to pass APF because the police ratio isn't right. That just doesn't work, it's illegal. So that is, I'm hoping to come close to finished with a bill of the entire APF provisions within a couple of weeks, I hope. And I hope you'll welcome me back to come and tell you what else I found. And that's all I had to say for today.
Thank you. Alderman Tierney?
Yes, hi. So on page 2 of the legislation, I just want to make sure I understand this. It's B1, the line 15. The ratio of police officers authorized in the current, okay, yeah, underline, except that if the ratio is less than required, where does that come from?
This is proposed.
What are you trying to say there? What do you mean, like, if the ratio is less than required? Like, who makes it less than required, or am I overthinking this?
I wouldn't say you're overthinking it, because the provision as it stands is the ratio of police officers authorized in the current city budget to city residents shall not be X. So all this requires is that it be in the budget. It doesn't say anything about the actual number of police officers.
So you're saying if the actual ratio is less than required, in other words, what we have is less than what, yeah, right.
If I were to be technical about this, it would be that the ratio is less than that stated in the budget.
Got it. Got it.
And so, but other than that, I mean, that's really what happened in the case that hit the news, the circuit court case. They couldn't meet the ratio because it wasn't in the budget, and so the police department said, well, you can do this instead. And that's what she struck down as not being authorized by our current city code.
Can you add in the budget after ratio?
Pardon me?
Can you add in the budget after ratio for those of us who overthink it? Right.
You could change the budget to say that number,
No,
but
I'm just, it's just wordsmithing. You know, when you said, except that if the ratio is less than required, I was just wondering, what are you referring to? And I understand you're referring to the budget. I just didn't know if we needed to put that in there again. That's all.
And thank you for those questions, because I have read this a million times, and I really think that it could be stated better. And in some part of me would prefer that this mitigation go into the mitigation section of the code, not here. So it depends on how you want to deal with this. If you want to do one thing right now to get it done relatively quickly, great, go with this. And then wait for the bill to come where I think it should go, which would be in mitigation.
Thank you.
Alderman Finlayson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Schuett, for joining us. Welcome back. You started off by saying no one else has APF in their codes.
No, I didn't say that. If I
What did you
did,
say?
I didn't mean
I'm
to
sorry.
say that.
What did you, you started off by,
I mean, most of the jurisdictions that have APF provisions have the standards in the code. They don't all have it with the same, don't cover the same facilities as ours.
okay, so they do have APF for police.
I don't know of anybody in Maryland that has an APF for police, no.
Well, that's what I was,
Yeah, I don't know of that. I'm not saying
Okay.
that there isn't
Okay.
somewhere. I haven't thoroughly checked that out, but I don't think there is.
okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said no one else in the city, in the state had APF for police. So my question was going to be, do we need this in our code? I was here when we added APF, a number of adequate facilities to our city code, and this was the last one, if I remember correctly, that we added. And I remember when we had the 6 years automatic, that you had to wait and automatically you could go forward with your project. So I was just wondering if the benefit of going back to the old system or to maintaining the ratio that we have. So I guess that's my first question.
Well, I haven't thoroughly digested this, but if in your spare time, you could read the
Okay, so
memo
what
from
you
the
were
Office of
giving
Law,
us-
which says there really isn't a clear correlation between the ratio and crime prevention. I think that's what it says. And so you can read that. I don't know what that is, but I think that most jurisdictions do not cover police because it's not one of the standard things that are normally included in APF. And like I said, it's really hard when you're dealing with like a fire department that wouldn't have, where people don't have any control over it. People have no control over the police, so they shouldn't be harmed. They shouldn't be harmed.
So would your recommendation be that we not have it in our code?
I would support that. I'm not I mean, who you put in is up to you. It's your policy decision, but I would support that.
Okay. The legislation that's in front of us, the ordinance doesn't have a number yet, speaks to using other things like the security, like cameras. Did the judge, I thought the judge said we couldn't use those means towards our APF
She did say that, and that's because it's not in the code.
because it's not in the code. So if we put it in our code, we're,
Supposedly she'd be okay with it.
okay. Okay.
My bigger concern is that although right now we're only talking about the officer ratio, and what I understand that the average response times right now, as set forth in 22-14-040B2, you have a great numbering system, I love it, that the response time is, they're easily meeting the response times right now, so that's great. However, if that were to change someday, 15 years from now, our response times are going down the tubes for whatever reason, they have no control over that either, and there's no mitigation for it. So it really is attempting to include things that aren't part of the realm of the basic citizens who's coming in to do a development, and to add things in that they have no control over is not good unless we can figure out some kind of mitigation that would allow them to go forward anyway.
One of my thoughts was that we would, in the city, we have, I'm saying no less than 5 law enforcement agencies helping to serve our city. We have our city, we have our county, we have our state, we have DGS, we have the Naval Academy.
We have drones, we have, the dispatchers, I mean, people who are
So
work with
would
the police officers.
it be feasible to consider using those mutual aid organizations towards our ratio?
I have read lots of mutual aid agreements, but I've never actually known how they actually work. I thought I heard somewhere that the police said that the first people who are going to be always called will be the Annapolis City Police. And I don't even remember now what those aid agreements relate to. If somebody wants to give me an example, I will look at it and get back to you. But I don't remember them as being, gee, we'll help you out with calling, taking calls from citizens who think that there's something going on in their development. I don't think that goes anywhere other than to the,
Well, and I'll let the chief
Yeah.
speak to this, but our calls go to the county first and then come to the city. And I was talking to someone, and I was driving down Forest Drive, and I passed 3 or 4 cars that had stopped other vehicles, and they were all county.
I didn't know that the city went through the county for calls.
Yeah, so we have a
Well-
very close relationship. And again, I'll let the chief speak to this, but.
That's great, but then it doesn't, it doesn't have as much meaning knowing that, because it's really not even the city police who are primarily handling.
In certain parts of our city, yeah.
Yeah,
So, thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Annette?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to reiterate, the purpose for my request to have this work session was to talk to the police department, the chief, to find out how he would speak to addressing the APF, this 3.2 ratio, and the response time ratio. And I would like to ask the chief what he thinks is the requirement that he needs to provide the optimal level of public safety, and then if we're going to go to a lesser standard, what he would need as a minimum requirement to provide safety. And it doesn't have to be a ratio or a response time, and I've said this, so as you know, I started off with a meeting with Alderwoman Finlayson and Alderwoman Pendle Charles, and I showed up at that meeting maybe as an uninvited guest, I don't know, But I continued the conversations with the police department saying, look, we want adequate public facilities rules in this city, but we leave it to you and to the fire chief and to the director of public works to tell us, you're the professionals, tell us what these APF standards are. And if we have it wrong, we can change it. Now, going back to first principles, the biggest single budget item we have is for police. The largest number of employees we have are for police. And I can tell you, and I bet every one of the other people on this dais have the same experience. When I talk to my constituents, their number one expectation from the city is public safety. They want that. That is something that is number one, even over clean water in, dirty water out. That's what they expect from the city. So I think it's entirely appropriate for us to have an APF for public safety. Whether the APF rules are good, I certainly subscribe to a lot of the things that Ms. Schuett is pointing out as deficiencies, and I think we ought to fix them. But I really wanted to hear today from the chief, from the police department, what are the standards that we need to have in order to assure that we can provide public safety? And it's public safety not only for the citizens, but also for the businesses and for the visitors and for the people who go to school here. And I would submit to you, and this is what's in this paper that I asked be sent to you, that really what we ought to be thinking about is not the population of the city, which is 40,000 plus, but the effective population of the city for the people who come here to work and come here to visit, come here at night to drink. All of those things are part of the responsibility for the police department to provide safety. And after that, I have always said to the chief, you tell us what these standards should be. And I still ask for that. And I do agree that we have to provide the budget to meet those resources. And when we don't provide the budget, which I think we always have always provided the budget for all of the police officers requested by the 3.2 ratio. Never not provided that. Well, not never, because apparently during the bankruptcy years, we went down to 116 officers, but we've always provided that. And I think, for me, that's what I would like to take away from this work session. If 3.2 is not an appropriate ratio or even an appropriate measure, and if response time isn't an appropriate measure, please tell us what is the appropriate standards to put in there. And I agree with you, Ms. Schuett, the standards ought to be in the code, not in rules, but we've been having a change in thinking about that. But just tell us what the standards are. We'll put them in, we'll pass them as quickly as possible. We have projects that are being held up because they can't get cleared through this APF for police. Nobody wants to see that, especially since it's a project for workforce housing, which is certainly a topic of discussion by the city. So what I have asked for and what I wanted to hear at this meeting is, if it isn't 3.2 in response time, tell us what it should be to have an adequate public facility measures and standards in the code. As far as the 6-year time period, I think the mitigation processes are in our code. I agree it should be shall, not should. And I think we shouldn't take 6 years to meet the standards, because we're not talking about doing these standards so we can have developments. We're talking about doing these standards so we can protect people. That's the priority here, protecting people, citizens, businesses, visitors. Development gets caught up in that net, but that's not the primary purpose for adequate public facilities. And so if we are not going to get that today at this work session, then I'd like to have another work session where we do hear from police what the standards are that they are comfortable and putting forth as meeting their obligations to provide public safety for the city of Annapolis.
So we're going to bring the chief forward, and Rhonda, if you want to come forward. Michael, do you want to come forward as well? Michael Laplace, sorry. Well, like you stated,
How are you?
they were recused with sprinklers, right? So, Chief, could you give Alderman Arnett your opinion?
Mr. Mayor, did you want to bring Chief O'Malley up or later?
Well, I mean, we did notice that the sprinkler law does supersede a lot of what we're talking about, so I don't think we're going to be digging into fire. You guys were not that keen about fire?
It's in your draft legislation, so it has to be discussed if we're talking about that as far as an equivalency that we want to expand. I mean, that's part of the appropriate conversation, I think, yes. But I
Okay,
also,
well, let's just finish with Alderman Arnett, because he needed that question here. I'm not going to
Okay.
yet. Do you want to come up, Chief, as well? Everybody wants you up here. I know you like the spotlight.
I'll give you all more.
Linda, I think, no, please stay up, because you can give us technical answers. Thank you, yeah. It's okay.
So just to reiterate,
We're all family here.
I know.
just to reiterate my two questions to you, Chief, and it's a question I've been asking all along. What is it that you need in order to provide the optimal level of police safety in the city? And that's a open question. You can tell us you need $1 billion. I don't care what you tell us, just tell us. And then what is the absolute minimum you cannot operate without having some threshold level of resources and feel comfortable that you're fulfilling your obligation to provide safety to Annapolis?
Yes, sir, and I promise you I'll answer those to the best of my ability. But I've heard two things I want to clarify as part of the record. The first thing was mutual aid agreements. Mutual aid agreements are generally entered upon between executives, mayors, county executives, and police chiefs. And they remain in force until somebody changes them. But mutual aid agreements does allow us to partner with allied agencies, but only to the degree that they are available. We can't factor into our deployment plans based on mutual aid agreements. Mutual aid agreements, to give you a quick example, would be that we had a big football game at Navy Marine Corps Stadium, and we had 50,000 people there. Then the mutual aid comes in that the Capitol Police or Department of General Service, the state police, and other allied agencies would support us in that. And so you can't, I'm more interested as a police chief that the APF or anything similar to that gives us the ability simply to protect it. And, I still don't know where the 3.2 came from, and I'll address that in a minute. And I tried to research that and how we even came up with that formula to satisfy our current strength. But the second point that I want to make in regards to the 911 system, the 911 system is operated by Anne Arundel County and not the city of Annapolis, but all 911 systems are county systems in this country. Even in big cities, the exception being Baltimore, because Baltimore is not a part of Baltimore County. It's its own jurisdiction. Therefore, they have their own 911 system because they're not a part of Baltimore County. But we are still the primary agency for public safety in the city of Annapolis because we are an incorporated city chartered by the Maryland General Assembly to operate as a full-service police department. So therefore, we have legally primary responsibility over everything public safety in the city of Annapolis. So I didn't want that to be misunderstood. Anne Arundel County does have jurisdiction here, but that's the jurisdiction that we agreed upon because Anne Arundel County is, the city of Annapolis is at the seat of Anne Arundel County. It's the seat of Anne Arundel County. And so, yeah, they can come in here, but we remain, for anything that occurs here, the primary jurisdiction to provide public safety. So I just wanted to clarify those 2 points. Mutual aid agreements are only good for planned events because the idea that chiefs have their departments to run too. They may have other assignments and duties and responsibilities, so they can't drop them at the drop of a hat because we request them. It's just saying if we need them for planned events, you know, and that could be a whole lot of things, then they're available to assist us with that aid. But that would be something that the mayor would have to agree upon, and he would direct me to provide him the best advice for mutual aid agreements. They generally stay into effect until one party, because a new county executive can come in or a new mayor can come in and say, we don't want the mutual aid agreements, and they'd be null and void if the next administration comes in. Since I've been here, I've been asking the question, sometimes flippantly, and I don't mean no disrespect to the process, but I never understood what the 3.2 per 1,000 meant anyway. So when you talk about a 3.2 per 1,000 residents, we should have 3.2, and I really am serious about this. I know math is math, but what's 0.2 of an officer? I think it's more realistic to have a formula that says that we have to have these many officers, because that's just a mathematical equation that nobody can explain. I favor, and I think that we should, because what I did was a couple of weeks ago at the direction of the city manager, Mike Malinoff, he said, Chief, why don't you find out from the Police Executive Research Forum, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and those kind of agencies, which I'm a member of all of them and participate in all of them, the Maryland Chiefs, find out from those agencies if they subscribe to a per 1,000 formula and try to find out what the origin was. None of them could tell me what per 1,000 was, and particularly we thought the source of it was the Police Executive Research Forum. According to them, and I had Miguel Dennis to notify them, they were adamant about the fact that they didn't know what we were talking about, and they never subscribed to that type of formula. What I favor is some type of a scientific approach, and that would be to commission a work load study. And how you do it, you look at cities that are comparable in size to the city of Annapolis. You look at cities with a 40,000 resident population. You look at capital cities, because we have assets here that even bigger cities don't have. You know, Baltimore's big, but they don't have the Naval Academy or the Supreme Court of Maryland, and you know, they don't have some of the assets we have here. So when you look at how we should be staffed to respond to development, it should be based on a more recent work load study. And those are the areas that we should be looking at. Cities comparable in size, comparable in assets, you know, and then that determines how many people that we need. My philosophy has always been, no matter what you put up in the city of Annapolis, as long as I'm chief, we're going to protect the assets. That's what our oath is all about. We're going to find a way to respond to it, you know, in coordination with the fire department, OEM. We'll get to the source. What this is an ordinance and an administrative barrier to development. And I think a lot of times it puts the chief in a very awkward position, because I see my role as protecting the assets, not to determine what assets come or don't come here. That's for the council and that's for developers. My job is simply to make sure that if they do come here, then we have the ability to do what the citizens, that's what real servitude is. You know, we don't set those kind of policies. What we do is obey orders enacted by the council or the legislative body or the mayor, and we carry it out. It's my job as the chief of police to make sure whatever you guys decide that I carry out. The problem with the 3.2 per 1,000 is exactly that. It's an ordinance. I tried to obey the ordinance, and we always fell just below that threshold. We were always in the 2.88 range or 2.87 range, and I didn't want to falsify your document, so we tried the mitigation. I was fine with the mitigation until the court ruling, you know, because all I wanted to do was, if that's the will of the council and the community, I just wanted to do what was in the best interest of whatever the council and the community wanted, and whatever the mayor wanted, the city manager. I wanted to be a good soldier and just make sure that the men and women that have the honor of leading, we come up with strategies and deployment plans to address them should they occur. But it's kind of morphed into this technicality. Because no 3.2 per 1,000, and you said it best, is no indication of our ability to protect it. If a terrorist attack occurred today, we'll find a way with my good friend Chief Doug Romali and OEM and everybody else. We'll just come together and then we'll go and address it and stabilize the city. It just happens to work out that way. And there's no formula, Alderman Arnett, that we can, and I mean this respectfully, there's no formula that we can come up with, mathematical formula. That's more qualitative than quantitative. That's a more qualitative thing. That means that's the spirit of the police department to protect and serve, to make sure we are good stewards over the resources that we have and properly managing the assets that we have in the police department. That's what determines our ability to protect any assets. To kind of sum it up, my recommendation would be that we commission a study and then bring the participants of that study before the council to explain what we should have in terms of numbers, and that would be based on cities that are comparable in size, not only population-wise, but geographically, and I know that's doable, and then that would determine, the number of officers, because no matter what you do, they all are estimates, and there's too many variables. Like right now, we just came out of COVID-19, we were very blessed, but say we did understand the 3.2 per 1,000, just for argument's sake, we really knew what that was about, which we don't, but if we knew what the 3.2 per 1,000 was, then we had a pandemic that hit the station house. It doesn't account for that, and we have 20 officers that are home, because of COVID or some other pandemic, or if an officers are injured in the line of duty, and many of them have to go out on medical leave because they were injured trying to abate a problem. See, it doesn't take any of those kind of things into consideration, and so we need a more realistic approach to say that these are the number of men and women that we have to have, and we have to be prepared to address that when it comes. And the last thing I'll say is that the biggest challenge, being the chief of police in Annapolis, as it pertains to the number of officers that I have, we need more of a relief factor. That 3.2 per 1,000 locked us into around 124, between 124 and 131 officers, depending on who you talk to. It fluctuates depending on who does the math. I favor the highest number, of course. That's my math. Whoever gives me the most numbers, to me, that's correct. But, the biggest problem is that we need a relief factor, and the relief factor is discretionary forces. People above and beyond the minimum. We need forces that we can dispatch on any given day. Should we have somebody who's sick, we have a pandemic where a lot of people are out right now. We can only hope that Anne Arundel County doesn't have the same thing. If we had 20 officers go out on the flu, I can pick up the phone and call Chief Howard in Anne Arundel County and ask her if she has a couple of officers you can spare until our officers come back from sick leave. Or I can call the state police and ask if they can have a couple of troopers to patrol the neighborhood. But that's the folksy way of doing it. That's just chiefs and administrators cooperating with one another. What we need is some type of relief factor to say in an emergency, we have men and women that can step up and fill in the gap. And then we just have to find a productive way to be responsible for their salaries and benefits to make sure that they're benefiting the city while we're waiting to address some type of natural or man-made disaster or some other kind of law enforcement challenge that we might have.
Mr. Mayor, Chief, I asked you two very straightforward questions. I'll ask it another way. How do you justify your annual budget? You must think about these things when you ask us for a budget. Why can't you give us that same answer in terms of the standards you need for the optimal level of resources you need for safety and the minimum level that you cannot guarantee safety without at least getting those resources, to tell us that we need to conduct a study. I actually agree with you. I think it would be good. I would ask Halen, can you give the chief this document that you copied from me? Because it shows all kinds of municipalities using the ratio, and they vary all over the place, and this paper actually says that the ratios vary all over the place, and I think a study would be great. But I will reiterate again, the APF is not to stop development. It's to assure that we're providing adequate public facilities across the board for all the services that the city provides. Adequate water, adequate sewer, adequate stormwater, all of those things are what adequate public facilities, and all I want, maybe no one else does. I just want to know from you, what are the things that you need to feel comfortable that you can provide?
Well, sir, you're asking me a very tough question. I'll answer it another way. I thought I answered it, but there's no set formula. That formula was already in place when I got here. The 3.2 per 1,000.
I told you.
Wait, hear me out. That number was established. Again, we don't even know what the 3.2 came from, but at the end result, I was told for my budget that I was only authorized maximum 124 officers. I've never assessed anything else because the ordinance says that I was locked into 124. What I'm saying to you now, sir, is that we need to go back and reevaluate that. The 124.
In your conference room.
I've said it before this body before that the 124 is too low. We need to expand the size of the Annapolis Police Department given what we are faced with on a daily basis. What that exact number is like, I don't think that anybody can tell you. We just have to establish a number. But I think that if we establish a number, at least we should know how we arrived at that. This 3.2 per 1,000 formula doesn't even give me the ability to explain coherently why we have 3.2, why we have 124 officers. A commission may say we need 150 officers, and this is why. I'm not prepared to answer that. I will tell you that I want more officers because I want to do more things, and I want to expand our ability to provide the kind of outreach. The end game is crime reduction, and the end game is that we have the safest city that we can possibly have. But sir, to ask me, nobody from my staff, and I'm not even going to expose them to even testify that, to say we need this exact amount of officers, it's unscientific. Does that sound right, Rhonda?
And if I can, Alderman, to say that law enforcement is forever changing. Each and every day, each and every month. I know you want us to throw a number out to say, this amount will meet the city's needs. And what the chief is trying to say is that he can't. He would. It wouldn't be good to set a number right now. There's new legislation in the state that change things, requirements that we have to meet, more training. More focus on or this or that. And each time a new law is added, there are new things for police to do. I can't know. You can't know. The chief can't know when or what is going to change in the law. And it would not be wise. It would be extremely risky, for us to sit and say, this exact number is what we need. And then tomorrow, the state or comes down, or the federal government comes down, changes some rules with policing, and we have to do certain things that require either we get more police, or that we need more training, or some things that require less police. Then just like the chief said, we can't throw an exact number out because I can't know. I can't know those things. I can't know if officers are going to be hurt.
Can you throw out a minimum? Can you throw out a minimum number? Suppose we said in the budget we want to authorize or pay for only 90 sworn officers. Is that too few?
That is too few.
Okay, so what is enough to be a minimum? Is 131 enough to be a minimum number? This is no different than the budget. It's this opposite side of the same coin. When you come to justify your budget request, you have to have a number in mind that is what you need in order to do your job.
I think the
I don't
chief is
see how
saying that the 124, we might be saying it different, that the 124, and it is a minimum. I just can't tell you what a maximum
fine.
is.
So give
Okay,
us
we've got that in writing, 124, thank you.
Yeah, all right.
We've got a short time here, so can I go to Alderman Gay, then Alderman Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few questions. So what I'm hearing is that the legislation that was introduced, 02317, was absolutely horrible and probably should have never made the daylight, because that's what established this definition of 02317. Was that what originally established the amendment to Title 22 for the count of officers? 02317?
Talking about this bill?
That's 02317. I guess nobody's familiar with that, okay?
That's coming from this.
Is that what got us here? Am I wrong on that or no?
The original dates back to 2006.
But
The original one is-
02317 was the one that changed, that gave this ratio for 3.2 officers, correct?
No, the original one is the 0296. That's where the 3.2, that came from David Cordell.
So we're getting two different things then, because on this sheet it says 02317, and then on this sheet it has
Changed the
two
definition of
asterisks that
officer, not
says.
the ratio. It didn't change the ratio.
Can I give you an answer
Yes,
on that?
please.
Because I reviewed it this morning. Back in, I think, 2006 or 7 was the original one that Alderman Arnett actually sponsored, like with Cordell, and that established the APF code for everything, including the police. At the time, it had a definition for officer that was expansive, and so the city manager and some directors could be considered as officers. That's what it was originally, and you'll see going back in the report from Ms. Ruther that the staffing numbers, going back 2007, we had 131 sworn officers, and that was changed in 2017, and that was supported by the police chief, and there's a whole staff report that explains it.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm pulling
And
up now.
that's what changed the definition to only be a sworn officer.
Awesome. Okay, on to the next thing. It was all bad legislation. I'm confused though in the draft, the draft that we received. You noted at one point we could pass this and then come back and change any concerns we have. Why not perfect this draft so that we don't have to pass two adequate public facilities for adequate police protection?
That might be me, Alderman Gay. This ordinance that's in front of us is something as a short-term solution because of the willows, because of the things that are backlogged here.
Absolutely.
We know that we have to do a lot more as an organization. We're just trying to help this particular housing.
I agree, and housing is important, but I know this city, and I know that if we pass this draft, it is very unlikely that we'll ever go back, probably another 17 years before we go back and make the change. But so in the draft under 2214-040, why, and maybe the mayor's staff can answer this, why did we make the change to Annapolis Fire Department as opposed to, I guess, what I was hearing in 2006, which I liked more, where the definition was not as strict, and so that other roles under that definition in 2006 would be able to qualify a police officer. I guess the reason I asked that, I don't see including the Annapolis Fire Department in this count, assisting in the goal of adequate public facilities for police protection. Wouldn't it make more sense to include a social worker or a community caregiver, someone who, why the fire department?
I think they have arresting powers. They carry guns. They've been to the police academy. I'll let the chief broaden that.
How many fire officers carry a gun?
So currently, we have 7 sworn law enforcement officers. They're assigned to the Fire and Explosive Services Unit. 2 of those are the chief and the deputy, who were investigators back then and still maintain their certification. But that's all that they're trying to do here. They're not saying that every firefighter counts in it. They're just saying that the sworn police officers that are assigned to that unit are counted as because they are sworn law enforcement
Would
officers.
they then be expected to serve in 2 roles as an officer and
So
as a?
as of right now, if they are working, if they're on their duty shift and something occurs in their presence, they're going to take action. If they are on the street and an officer needs backup, they currently do that. That's not this ordinance, adding them to the ordinance. Now, the definition is just that, people that are in the Annapolis Fire Department that are certified by the Maryland Police Training Commission. So it's not, like I said, it's not all the firefighters, it's the 7 individuals, but it's not going to take away from their duties. They're not going to be out here patrolling the street for crime every day. That's not what they do. But when they're out, and there's a need, they will assist, but they're assisting.
Do they
police.
do police training, mental health?
Yes.
Training?
Yes.
Gun training?
Yes, absolutely. They do all that. They have to maintain the same standards as an Annapolis police officer for in-service training every year. Police department's going through in-service training right now that has mental health and other avenues in that current 40-hour training, and our investigators have to attend that training.
And they can carry a fire.
They carry firearms and they have full police powers.
Yeah, which I'm not thrilled about. But I mean, well, no, I just feel like if we're going to change the adequate public facilities to, and particularly for protection in our communities, there are examples that this packet here doesn't include, but there are examples, and particularly after 2020 across the nation, where municipalities are using out-of-the-box alternatives to policing, not with their adequate public facilities, but changing the definition and revamping their departments. And it also has opened up opportunities for additional funding. And I guess my biggest thing is, while I support the change of the adequate public facilities, and from what I'm hearing, or I think you may have admitted to the Alderwoman, is that we actually don't even really need this. It could really probably just be pulled all together, because no other places in Maryland have adequate public facilities for police.
Correct.
In our package, we did have one for Prince George's. Can you speak to that, though? It says, I'm sorry, adequate public, I think it may be the only one, or at least the only one that I noticed. Sorry. So other Maryland communities. And then on the second page, it says Prince George's is the only one that has police in it. Police facilities. Can you explain the difference in that from how we currently operate?
I have not read that, so I need.
Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah. That can be written or emailed. That's no problem at all. I would have liked, I'm not sure how often your group is meeting, the work session on the adequate public facilities.
Every week.
Every week, okay. It'd be great if you all could just maybe take into consideration my recommendations for alternatives to the fire department.
And can I say this, Alderman Gay? A big part of my job, and I think one of the most difficult parts of my job as the chief of police, is to manage expectations. And the chief is sitting right here, so surely I'm not speaking for him, but his sworn members are fire marshals. In Baltimore, they have arson detectives. We don't have arson detectives. Arson and explosives is the responsibility of the fire marshal. So when I say manage expectations, that's their area of expertise. They're not going to be called upon to investigate murders like APD, or rapes, or child abuse, or aggravated assaults, or domestic violence. That's not the type of police that they are. They are sworn, and I think that they are most valuable when we have big events like parades and things like that. They can chip in because they have the authority to stop vehicles. They have the authority to take people in custody who commit crimes in their presence. Like I said, they're full-fledged police, don't get me wrong, but they are marshals, and correct me if they're fire marshals, and their expertise is to investigate arsons and fires and explosives.
So where could we provide, and again, I'm not agreeing with anybody on this. I think we should change it in some way, shape, or form. I'm just not sure how yet. Where could we provide, because again, what I'm hearing with the fire is that yes, they would technically count, but they would not actually be operating as a police, only except for extreme circumstances at an event or if they see an actual crime taking place, which to me still leaves my community of Ward 6 vulnerable, because we would still probably be understaffed and we probably wouldn't have the staffing necessary, to leverage hotspots like Eastport Terrace or Robinwood. And so how could that, again, not including the fire department, and I'm not saying it in a mean way, it's more because I don't want to give fire the responsibility of fighting crime when, we have fires going on. And so who can we bring in maybe just to subsidize the police department? I see on the draft, it actually does mention, or the authorities, I guess, to bring in like security and all of that stuff. It says offer ratio, except that if the ratio is less, the police department may require security measures such as security cameras, the hiring of off-duty officers, da-da-da-da-da. Can that count?
I personally agree with that. If, of course, I want to prevent it, but what I don't want or recommend as a chief of police, if we can't meet this threshold of 3.2 per 1,000, and I'm all in agreement that if they're willing to provide camera footage with the type of fiber optics that connects to our cameras, that my investigators could at least find out who's committing these crimes and go after them, even if we can't prevent them. Or if I have somebody in the watch center, which we're trying to get more people there, and somebody can see in real time from the Annapolis PD, this guy's lurking around, he looks suspicious, and get somebody over there and prevent it that way.
Yeah,
and so for that reason, I am in favor of that.
That would be great to include. Because think about it, when we have these developers come in, there's adequate public facilities for everything. And typically they add to the physical infrastructure, they add to the recreation. And so I don't get why would it be out of the ordinary to say, hey, you're building a new community and adding, residents and that could potentially add crime. Enhance your property with the appropriate protective equipment, the appropriate surveillance equipment.
I even like that better than using Doug's people, because we have this concept manager. First of all, he's their commanding officer, not me. Those marshals, he has direct authority over.
But if they were to, under this, would they then start to report to you because they'd be sworn police officers?
No, they still would report to the fire chief. He's their commanding officer. And then there's this thing called unity of command that OEM teaches us, that Director Simmons does, that subordinates are only answerable to one superior. They work for him. He may have work for them to do that's explosive and arson related. I have no authority to tell them to do anything. I would have to go through Chief Romali and his deputy chief if he's absent, Curl Spriggs, and it's a whole bureaucratic process legally that we would have to go through. So I just didn't want that to be misinterpreted too, because they count. If you want to count them in the numbers to meet the threshold, that's one thing. But their actual duties. Now, don't get me wrong. My good friend here, every time I need something, he gives it to me. But that's different than actually being able to put them in a strategic plan or in a deployment plan. Two different things. I can pick up the phone and say, Doug, we having Juneteenth Day parade. We need three people, your people available to help us out with traffic control or crowd control. And, it's a high probability if they're not doing anything, he would say, sure, chief, or if something happened like the tornado happened, everybody was there that night, and we just kind of coordinated it, everybody, when the tornado hit West Street. Those are exceptions as a part of the rule,
and the
as opposed to the rule.
Unity of command, I remember that, I wrote that down. This is all great. Please keep this part in and maybe even enhance it if you don't mind, Mrs. I'm so sorry, I forgot your last, Shuit? Linda, okay, Linda, if you don't mind. Just keeping part one in, I think the requirement of security cameras and all of that stuff and the draft, and if we could even enhance that language, that'll be great. And then also, for the draft that you had under section 22-14-040, the first part, if we could keep the requirement into the security cameras and maybe just change the language, I don't know, so that it is required at the start of development, or how would that work? I'm not sure. I don't know, I guess you'll figure it out. But
are you suggesting that we take out everything other than security measures? We could, we don't have to mention.
Well, because it says that, the 3.2, I wasn't sure why that was in. It's confusing.
The 3.2 is just existing law.
Yeah, but if this is changing it, wouldn't that take, on one, it says officer ratio, the ratio of police officers authorized in the current city budget to city residents shall not be less than 3.2 officers per 1,000 city residents. Can that be taken out since it's going to be,
If you're going to take it out, let me just suggest this. All communities care about fire and emergency medical services, and those are really important to them. But the standards for fire are only response times. Why should the measurement be anything other than response times for the police as well? In other words, to kind of answer your question, one could come out altogether and we keep in two.
but one has the important part because it has the camera qualifications and all of that.
But we wouldn't need that because that part, the ratio of residents to police officers would go away. So that would not be part of APF. Nobody would be stopped in the development because of that.
So how do we then add to the adequate public facilities so that when a developer comes in for an application and they have to, or are you just saying we wouldn't have APF so they wouldn't have to go?
We'd have APF only, but only as to two, average response time.
Okay, well, how can we do 2 and 1?
Why do you want to do one? I thought you were saying that the ratio.
Well, I think 1 is important because like I was explaining with like, when they do the traffic studies and all of this other thing, all developers are typically required to invest in some sort of, physical project. And I look at the security cameras as a physical project for their development.
I hear what you're saying. I think that's a great idea, but I don't think it's an APF issue. What I think it is the change to your code about what you have to do when you're developing.
Okay.
So if you're, it could be, say something like if this is going to be a 40-unit development, then you have to do X, Y, and Z, like security.
Okay, I will follow up with law about that because I think, that's just incredibly important. I appreciate this. And I don't know if you are open to meeting with the council. I'll send you some of the reports that I have looked at in regards to adequate public facilities and post-lease definitions, definitely.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Thank you, Alderman Savage. And so it was a 1.5-hour meeting, so we're a little bit over, just letting you know that.
Sorry about that.
And there's another 30-minute presentation coming up.
Yeah. Well, I thought we had stuff bumped from this meeting to dedicate 2 hours to this. So in any case, I think really the conversation should have started, as far as the APF, starting about, as Alderman likes to say, first principles about, and you did get into this in terms of why we even have an APF. So I'm not going to go too much into that, but I do want to speak to the importance because we need to keep that in mind. We have these in place so people don't get sewage backing up into their houses due to inadequate sewage pipe. So they have adequate water pressure, water that comes out of their sinks, their showers. So the kids have adequate recreational space, so on and so forth. Those are the real reasons why we have them. And police, I think, it's kind of an example I'll get into a little bit more, but I'll state that, because essentially if we reduce, actually, I'll just save that for later. I'll mention this later, but for now, I want to talk to Ms. Schuett. I do want to thank you for coming, and I do think the conversation about APF is very important to have about the broader. But I also just want to point out, I feel like the order of things are a bit off, because I think you said you were going to get us draft legislation on the APF.
On that what?
The
APF changes you were
At
recommending.
some point, if that's what
Yeah.
the city wants,
Well,
I will prepare
I
it,
think-
and then it's all of your responsibility to figure out what to do with it.
I think we do, but I do think if you're going to be drafting something for the council, I think it'd be a good idea to have a dedicated meeting to the APF. We can dig into your comments, but also get our feedback, try to get the sense of the council before drafting something if you're going to be doing that for us. Because right now it just seems like you're doing that for the administration or whoever, city manager who hired you. That's kind of the feeling I'm getting from this. I also think, let's see, because one of the issues I mentioned with, because I'm working on, I think I have one or two pieces of legislation I'm working on as far as the APF in general. Like one of them is, for example, one concern I have is the planned unit developments. There's no expiration on the certificates of adequate facilities that they get. Same thing we had, we called them, in the paper called them zombie permits from Rocky Gorge, the permits that never expire. Turns out they have a big loophole in the APF where those only type of project where those certificates never expire. We could change the law tomorrow. We've done it many times with our APF and that wouldn't apply. So that's something where I have legislation to actually put, I think, 5 or 6 year some with like a 5-year expiration to those with possible extensions. But in any case,
I've been asked to look at planned unit developments, by the way, at some point, but it's not going to be in the next month, that's for sure.
well, that's built into they have a built-in exception in the APF code.
Right, okay. There are other issues around planned unit.
Oh, yeah,
development, so.
there are a lot of issues. And I do want to point out as well that, I mean, you said there was no mitigation, but there is an entire mitigation chapter in our APF, the chapter 2228.
There is.
And that says that there are forms of mitigation, basically it's determined by the Director of Planning and Zoning in consultation with the department. So there is that clause in there.
There is, but it doesn't say anything about how you make the decision. I mean, it's just,
I know, but there's a big difference between us not having details versus us not having mitigation. Mitigation is in there, because I think you said there was no mitigation.
But it's very vague and broad with no.
That's fine, but that's not how you worded it when you spoke to us. You were saying there was no mitigation.
There's no mitigation available under that provision for police.
There is. This applies to the entire APF chapter.
Well, and actually, one thing, I don't know whether this was argued, I didn't get to read any of the briefs in that case, but you could argue that the security cameras, et cetera, are authorized by that very broad.
Yes, you could.
You could. I don't know why that wasn't made, or whether it was made and rejected. I didn't read it in the opinion. But my preference would be to have it clearer. I'm used to seeing, for mitigation for roads is this, and for mitigation, they all have their separate particular types of, and to have an overall, you can do whatever the heck you want, doesn't make me happy, although I understand what you're saying.
Okay. Now, for the police department, I appreciate you saying, making the point that we are capital, and it seems like that brings along with it special needs and requirements as far as servicing.
Yes, sir. And a quick example that comes to mind, Alderman Savage, is that on any given day, the population last census is a little over 40,000 people. But I would argue that it's far more than that on any given day. The legislature's in effect. In the springtime, there's a lot of events. So what if something happens? Our ability to protect the facilities has to go forth when the population is double the 40,000. Sometimes you may have an extra 20,000 people in the city at various venues on any given time. So that doesn't satisfy that formula either. And I would argue that the 40,000 is based on the idea that most people are home in bed and asleep, and that's after everything. Yeah. The residents who live here, that's after everything shuts down. Well, we need to have a more accurate depiction when the city is up and vibrant. Yeah. Does that make sense? And that entails more than just the population in the city of Annapolis.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do thank you, Chief, because I think you're part of the reason why this has come to the forefront, and this is, I think, something that we have needed to discuss for a while. I do want to make the point, too, as far as even looking at this legislation, without having any kind of idea as far as regular policy, as far as what role the police are the fire are going to play, if we lower the ratio, and I know this doesn't propose to lower the ratio, but I think if we even talk about lowering the ratio, that's essentially defunding the police, because what we will say is, oh, we only need 115 officers, so that's all we're gonna fund. Mm-hmm. I wanna make that point, because I think one thing I've heard you say in the budget, I think this last budget, I can't remember the one before, but in any case, in the previous budget is that, that you don't have enough officers, and that your officers are overworked, working multiple shifts, and that's kind of driving some of if we have them leave, because they're getting burnt out, right? That tells me that there is an ideal number somewhere. Like how many officers do you need to stop them from having to be stretched too thin? That's, I think, the number that Alderman's trying to get to. That's what we need to know.
And that's accomplished by looking at our calls for service, in addition to the population and our organizational chart and our workload. It deals with, if we commission the study, and the study doesn't have to take all year. We can contract them to come in and give them a window that it's urgent so that they can come back before you and explain how they arrived at the number that they arrived at, and that makes for a more informed council. I just think it's better for everybody involved, and they would do things that I know for a fact. I'm sitting here reading, and I did read this. You gave me a copy of this before, or sent it to me electronically, and he's absolutely right. But I think that when you talk about workloads analysis, which I favor far more because you can justify it, then you're looking at calls for service. You're looking at how many calls for service and what those calls are for. Calls of an emergency nature, calls that we can kind of delay because it's not of emergency nature. And then we can look at the times that the calls were dispatched and the time that the officers arrived. And we can look at and that's what they would do. They would look at a whole layout of the city, and they would come up with an acceptable response time based on the nature of the call, not just a blanket response time, but it's a response time based on, if somebody's in cardiac arrest, of course, the response time would be different than if somebody wanted to report that their hubcaps were taken while they were in Mexico for 3 weeks and came home. That's two different response times,
Right.
And so those are the kind of things that the study would articulate, and then that determines a good round number, not an exact number. It's no such thing. And if I sat there, I'd be sitting here prevaricating or lying, for a more layman's term, if I could say that there's an exact formula. And then I would hate to have to come back to you and you say, well, Chief, you told us that you need 142 officers. Why is all of this going on? It goes back to what Rhonda said a while ago. It's too many variables. Fluctuation occurs. But the nature of law enforcement is too unpredictable.
Yeah, and I mean, I have thoughts on a study, and I guess, my point is, we have a budget coming up here soon. If this passes, we're trying to get this done soon. This essentially is going to reduce the number of officers you have, because that 3.2 is going to, if this passes, is going to include fire, which means we don't need as many sworn police officers, right? So that means we're going to go into your budget and say, you need to tell us how many you need in your budget, because we're no longer going to need the whatever that works out to be 124 budgeted, because that's based on this 3.2. So we're going to need a new number for this budget, and that means we're not going to have time to get a consultant. I mean, I think, basically, how can your department get that to us? Because, I mean, we get numbers from the fire department as far as how many they need, how many people they need per unit, per whatever, and that's how they get their, I'm going to fudge all the certification numbers, I can't remember, but they got that certification that they've been talking about each budget based on the number of firefighters they have had, and they've done the analysis, because I've harassed you guys enough over the years, you've gotten that, but we don't have any of that for police, and so I don't even know how to get my head around this for this year's budget, because the number is such, I don't know what the mayor's going to be proposing for his budget, because I don't know what the number is.
And I'm rolling the dice now here, and I don't go to Casino Live that often, but I'm rolling the dice here. I strongly suspect, based on 41 years as a police officer, I strongly suspect that this 3.2 per 1,000 is going to be woefully understaffed. I think if we commissioned a study, Alderman Savage, they're going to say, you're cheating yourself. The city's cheating yourself. Now, how you pay for it is another conversation, should the numbers increase. But I think that everything in my gut, as a college professor and as a 41-year police veteran, is going to say that 3.2 is woefully under the number. And so I would recommend to the council that we transition it. We don't have to resolve it here today, but we need to, because I was willing to, it wasn't me, I was willing to mitigate to the best of my ability these projects. And it was only when I heard about the court ruling that it kind of threw a monkey wrench in everything. But I also advocated that we take a real good look at this 3.2 per 1,000, because we can't explain it. At least if we replace that with another formula, a more adequate formula, then you can look at that number and determine in the future whether we need to downsize or upsize. But right now, we're stuck in this 3.2, and nobody can explain where the 3.2 comes from. So we don't know whether we are over or under. At least with a new formula to replace that, we can articulate whether we need to increase the size of the force or you see what I'm saying, based on calls for service and those things.
To your point, and I mean, that's also to Ms. Schuett made And I guess I'm getting more open to the idea of removing the ratio. First, I had concern, but bottom line is, even if you remove the ratio, we're still going to have some number in the budget that is a hard number. Regardless of the APF, we need that number. Just like we get the number from the police, we know exactly how many people he needs. He's been telling us for years when he doesn't have enough people for the ladder truck or from the layoffs, but we need the equivalent, I think, for the police to really be making a good. We want you to have the resources you need, because again, I don't want the officers to be overstretched thin and leaving. That's counterproductive, and I think that's what we're trying to solve with the APF, is to help make sure that development is paying, because they're the ones putting pressure on our infrastructure, right? They're helping you, helping us, and not just the taxpayers footing the bill. So if we can get to that goal with our APF, I'll be happy.
Can I say one thing real quick? It's not long, but to make
Chief,
my point that.
Chief, we don't have too much time, so we've got
Yes, sir.
another 30 minutes behind you.
1 second. Most of our officers multitask under this 3.2 per 1,000. They're SWAT, they're patrol, they're CID. Sometimes one officer does 3 different things. You don't find that anywhere else that I'm aware of.
Well, and I think we do need to have more of a conversation, though, as far as the specific legislation, because as far as getting our input, and this is the first time I've been engaged on this, I like the idea. I'll open to the idea of having the equivalencies as far as, do we want to offer, help have developers contribute to cameras, to whatever else you think would be helpful.
Yeah, I know.
However,
Yeah.
I'd rather have officers, because that, I think, officers, it seems like, would be more in line with our goals for community policing, right? Yes, sir. As opposed to cameras. I think we do need cameras in some places, but what I'd rather see even before cameras or that mechanical infrastructure is, again, people. If it's not officers, let's talk about working in something to get developers to contribute to social workers. Hiring more social workers. I mean, my wife's getting her master's of social work and telling me all kinds of things. She was telling me last night how, and she's working in PG County, that there are too many clients per social worker, and they're being burned out after 1-2 years. And I said, well, can't you cap the number of clients? And she's like, no, we can't just leave people out to hang to dry, Rob. And I said, well, okay, well, how do you get more staff? And she's like, well, either you pay them more so they don't get burned out, hopefully, or you just get more staff. And that's where it's a funding issue. And that's where I think to get this APF to work, we need to expand it beyond just fire, because I'm open to fire, but I would need to see a specific policy about how and when the firefighters are going to be used to support the police department, and how that's really going to help us accomplish our goal. Because frankly, and maybe we need a separate APF for social work, but that's more, preventative, right? As opposed to, I think police are more reactive. I think you've said before, police aren't necessarily trained to do all the work like social workers are doing. It's not fair to give that all onto you, but I think we need to expand this into funding our Office of Community Caring and something like that.
And I just want to say, look, this is just at a starting point here. This is nothing. This is the first I'm hearing of it too. It's not like the administration has developed policy without bringing. We're at a starting point here. There is a short-term solution that is being suggested to help the Willows. We know that that's not the answer, but it's a short-term solution to help the Willows. So whether the council has a will for that, that's up to you guys. But I am going to call it here because we have another 30-minute presentation. No, Alderman Gakill.
Well, it's a point of order, so.
If you would like to meet up with any of these people afterwards,
Okay, well
you can do
then a
that.
point of personal privilege, which I believe I don't need a second for, right? I'd like to make a motion to postpone the presentation of the City Dock Action Committee so we can continue with the adequate public facility.
It's a work session, so you can't do that. Thank you.
Where does it say that at?
I run the meeting. We have people here who have come to this meeting that are not working for the city. I know you can abuse people that work for the city, but there are people at this meeting that are not working for the city, and they've come to this meeting, and you don't have...
Have you ever seen me abuse a staff member?
Oh, my God.
And it's been advertised, right?
But this is not the conversation we had when we set up this meeting.
This is an hour and a half. It went an hour over, half an hour over what we
We specifically
established.
bumped the resilience, which is timely, to have an hour or 2 hour discussion about police. We bumped something else and then something else to put on without our knowledge.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Phillips.
we're hearing from, and there's a woman in the audience now from one of the projects. They come to every meeting and ask us to figure this out so that we can give them an answer. So we really requested this meeting with the hope of coming to some resolution.
Do you think you're going to get to a resolution today? You're
Well-
hearing information.
We're going to get much closer than we have been. I mean, we may all have a pretty good idea by the end of the meeting which way we want to go if we have to vote on this. But if we're going to shut it down, then, I mean, we still don't have a clue.
Okay, so I'm going to let it go for another. Scott, I'm going to have to ask you to come back again. So, but I'm going to tell you in 30 minutes, you're not going to have an answer. So we can continue. So if you want to keep asking questions, Alderman Gay, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, listen, I
No,
don't
you can't.
want I don't want anybody to be upset. Go on with the presentation. My last question is just this. Can I have an understanding of the timeline?
Which is this ordinance here, counting fire, commissioned fire officers who have gone to police school. That's a short-term solution. We, as a council, need to come up with a broader solution, right? None of us know where 3.2 has come from. We've heard from the police chief today. We've heard from the police chief today that he thinks we need more police officers, and he thinks that formula is much higher than 3.2. But I think that stuff is going to take us a long time. I mean, I'm sure we'd all agree. Let's continue asking questions now, and if you have, there's no vote goes down today. This is just an information session.
So, okay, so just, all right, with the Willows, so will we, and I'll support you either way, Gav. Can we pass at some point, this draft that you have so that they can proceed with the project, and then as she suggested, which I was against, but I believe that it will happen, then we go back in so that he can do his study or whatever they like, and we actually come back in. Okay, all right.
So Linda's work is removed from this work. This wasn't drafted by Linda. This was drafted, did you draft this? Sorry. The first draft was two options that we gave to Alderman Arnett to see if this would help, if any of these two were satisfactory. They actually weren't satisfactory enough, if I'm right, Alderman Arnett. But I've decided, you know, that in the interest of the Willows, that we move forward on the short-term solution. It isn't the solution, right? We have to do a lot more work on APF to come up with something that.
Well, can we get it? Is it inappropriate to ask, and this is my last question, Alderwoman, I'm sorry. Is it inappropriate to ask what the will of the council is at this point? I guess, again, my concern is that if they have to get this underway by a certain period of time to keep their tax credits, the next planning commission meeting is the 24th. So we could get this on the agenda at our meeting on the 28th, pass it that night, suspend the rules because we all agree that this should be done, and then get back into a work group with Ms. Schuett's guidance to get the actual adequate public facilities completed, right?
My understanding of the tax credits is they are a year and a half away. They have to be built in a year and a half, and I'll let you come forward and speak if you'd like to. Thank you.
The tax credits require.
Use the mic.
Just push the button.
Should be on.
Okay. The tax credits require occupancy by 12/31/24. I've sat here the whole meeting and I hesitate to say.
Your mic is not on.
Please turn the mic on. Thank you.
Okay. I've sat here the whole meeting, and I think it's very encouraging. I appreciate your efforts, the efforts of the mayor. I understand everything the outside counsel said from having read this code. I don't think it's that complicated. It seems to me that, as the chief said, math is math. Right now, the city has budgeted 124 officers. That's not adequate to meet the 3.2. It comes to 131 officers if you round up to the population that Miguel Dennis used in his formula, and if you assume that the Willows population is all new residents, it would still round to 131 officers. So I think what Gavin has done here, or the mayor has done here, is tried to work on a Band-Aid solution that says, gee, we're 7 officers short. We have 7, I may say it technically wrong, but we have 7 people in the fire department who also have police powers. Let's add these 2 together so we meet the 131 and we can pass this legislation, get it across the finish line so that the Willows can move forward to Planning Commission. And in the interim, you can work with your council here to correct all these deficiencies in the code.
Agree. I just agreed, and thank you very much for that. The concern, again, that I've laid out, and I'll turn it over to the Alderwoman after this because she had her hand up. Well, actually, it's your authority to do that. I'm sorry. If we do this, then maybe include in the legislation, like this has to be completed in a year. I just don't want there to go another decade go by and everybody's like, oh, well, we're good now with adequate public facilities because we're including fire in it. And so that's my concern. But thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to support your initiative.
The one thing I should add, since it was a concern of several people, we've said this in our emails earlier, we're happy to enter into the mitigation agreement. They're putting in all the cameras. If the police wants access to the cameras, I've said this several times, maybe it would be better for the police to have us sign the mitigation agreement. You fix the APF, but then we're legally obligated to give the police access to the cameras, which we're happy to do anyway. So it seems then the police gets what they want, it passes, and yes, you should work for a solution. But at this point, the way it's been in the paper, the fact that the code is so deficient, the longer you put it off, the higher the probability that you're going to have a bigger issue on your hands based on all the calls I got after that article in the paper.
Thank you, Alderman Gay. So I promise you, this is a high priority for us, so we will make it that. Alderman Pindell Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My role here is your Public Safety Standing Committee Chair. I'm not trying to disregard any housing or construction issues, but there's not a day that passes in this nation that there aren't shootings and killings and the whole 9 yards. To me, 1 officer too short is too many. Now, my suggestion, and I'm going to ask the chief this question, you talked about a workload study, and I'm not going to ask you to give us a timetable, but what could be a general estimate to get a workload study completed? I'm not going to hold you to it.
No. We could probably, and Rhonda can pretty much answer that question better than I, but I would argue that in 30 days, if we contact the right, not completed, but get somebody contracted within 30 days to do it. And I don't know, maybe another 60 days after that. So just around a ballpark figure.
Right. Of course, Baltimore City has more officers than the last workload study that I actually participated in was when I was with Baltimore City, and it took about 4 to 5 months to complete the study. But there are, of course, a larger agency, more moving parts. As the chief said, things that we would be looking at, is comparable cities, response times, looking at call volume, looking at training requirements, the whole 9 yards to complete that study. A ballpark figure, depending on if we could get a contractor in and have it approved, probably about 1 to 2 months to do.
Right.
I don't want to sacrifice safety at all, not for housing, not for the city dock. That's extremely important to me, because should something happen, and I pray and hope that it doesn't, that will affect our entire city and how we move forward on the city dock and all of those other things that we want visitors to come to our city for on a regular basis, year after year. And if they feel like they are comfortable coming here and safe, no disrespect to housing or the Willows, then it's going to bode well for all of us. I'm willing, this is me speaking, to wait for this study and then move forward on whatever legislation we need. And I'm looking at Alderman Gay, and he's from Ward 6, and I'm surprised I'm looking at his face, because I'm sure he wants public safety to be priority.
Alderman Gay, please, you don't have the floor.
What, say that on the record, Alderman Gay.
A lack of housing builds excessive crime.
Alderman Gay. Thank you. Alderman Annette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do want to correct something that you said. When I saw the two different drafts, I rejected just getting rid of the 3.2, but I asked the city manager, have you talked to the fire chief? I wanted to make sure that the fire chief was comfortable with appropriating part-time 7 of his staff, which I presume he's justifying as fulfilling his mission. I will say for myself, I want to see a short-term solution. I don't want to see the willows die. I do think that we need to do things to do workforce housing. And the only thing I would ask is that if we pass this, that we don't stop doing the things that the chief has said here. That's why I gave you this paper, the workload analysis. And I know you can tell us a number. I know that when I asked Rhonda, is 90 enough? She knew immediately, no, it's not enough. And I agree with you. I don't think the population in the city is 40,000. I bet you 40,000 people come into the city every day to work, let alone to visit, and let alone, I bet you there's 10,000 that come in at night to drink. And I see all the cop cars down at the foot of Main Street. So I think that we shouldn't get hung up on the 3.2. I've said that to you all along. It's a proxy. But if 3.2 isn't a good proxy, give us a good proxy. That's all we're asking for, is a good proxy. You want to go drinking.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure. Yep.
Thank you. Because the thing that bothers me about this is that what the law says is that the ratio of police officers authorized in the current city budget to city residents, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean, you could say, okay, we need 140 police officers, and you put them in the budget, and then we don't have them anyway, because we're hiring, across the country, people are having a hard time hiring. So it doesn't mean that following this does not mean that you necessarily get more police officers.
So, and actually, we discussed that when we were passing this, when we were drafting it. And we intentionally left it that if it was budgeted for, you met it. So I've never really, we sometimes don't meet what we're budgeted for, but we've said all along, let's budget for it. We, as the budget authority, have done our job for the police. If the number is they should get 124, we put that budget there. Now, I think we should do more. I've talked about a recruit and retain bonus that is much bigger than we're talking about now. So we put our money where our mouth is. If we really want to have the full complement of officers, let's pay for it. And I've told you, I think I can get my constituents to pay for a significant recruit and retain. And I laid it out at one of our meetings, what it was. And Kerry Berger said, can we get it for the Office of Law too? but I think this is solvable. I think there is a short-term thing. I don't think we should do legislation for a particular project, but I also don't think we should let projects, which I think everybody thinks has value, go down the tubes because we need to do another study. I am perfectly, and I've said this to you over and over again, I'm perfectly willing to accept whatever it is you tell me the standard is. If it's response time, if it's workload, if it's 3.9, not 3.2, I don't care. I don't know. You do. And that's all I've said all along. Just give us a replacement.
But I'll make one final point. My deputy chief, and everybody knows what he's going through right now. We're probably two guys in our mid-60s that are trying to relive our youth, but the spirit of the Annapolis Police Department is that we all roll up our sleeves. I'm very involved, and so is my deputy chief. I miss him because I can't turn to him and delegate like I'm accustomed to because he's addressing something more important, and that's his daughter's health. But when we take this, that's what I meant when I said it's qualitative versus quantitative. When you all confirmed me almost 4 years ago, I think in large part, my enthusiasm had a lot to do with it, and not solely my knowledge. In other words, my willingness to be a part of the community and to let the residents know that I care and that we're out there. And so when you talk about these numbers, you have to have a baseline. You have to have a number to fund. I get that, but that doesn't substitute. And that's all I was trying to articulate. Whatever facility comes up, we're going to do our very best, to the best of our human ability, to protect it. You know, that's not going to be a deterrent. I'll never sit here, I don't deserve to be the chief anymore if I'm going to sit here and say, well, because we are understaffed or because we don't meet that threshold, we can't protect the agency. We'll find the infrastructure. We'll do our very best under the commitment of our oath to protect and serve, to protect life and property. That's at the core of what we do, protect life and property, no matter how many people in here. We'll do our very best. That's why I was willing to mitigate until we get more sound ordinance. But I will end by saying that I do think that the city's doing itself a disservice if we don't get an ordinance to determine our strength that's explainable. You know, we have to be able to explain that to 3.2 per 1,000. We can't explain that. It has no business in law. And an ordinance is a form of law. It has no business. I would hate to think that we have any ordinance that we can't explain if we're called upon to do so.
We're going to say Alderman Finlayson, then Alderman Gay had his hand up, and Alderman Tierney.
Well, let me first apologize for having to leave. My aunt is in the hospital, and that was the hospice nurse calling. I was supposed to be there, but they're having a blizzard right now, so all flights were canceled. So I was able to attend this meeting. I wanted this meeting so that we could come to a consensus of the council, hearing from the police chief and the fire chief. With their recommendations, can we come to some solution that it may not be a long-term solution, but it's gonna help us get beyond where we are? Because right now we're stuck. We don't even have the discussion, so we can't begin to find any solutions. We've got the willow stick sitting out there, and I'm not suggesting we act for one property or one project. There are 4 or 5 other projects that are in the works also. But we have to take an action, whether it's for or against. Let's take a sense of the council. And I say, let's take a sense of the council now. We can't vote on anything. But if Monday night, if this is on the agenda, how many are gonna be willing to vote for it as a first step? It's not the end all and be all.
One.
So I'm seeing
5
votes.
Yep.
So I say we go forward with it. In the meantime, we can continue our discussions with the chiefs, and if we want to amend or whatever, unless we move to second reader on, first night, it's up to us. But at least let's get off this dime and make a decision about something, get a consensus. So thank you for all of you who raised your hand. We're going to count on you. Somebody took a picture of that, so. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Gay, then Alderman Tierney, then Alderman Savage.
Just quickly and I have to ask the chief this because we've got constituent emails about this as well, and my colleague has just alluded to it. When they say that if we budget so if you need 124 officers and we give you that budget so you can meet that you'll fill it. That has not been true, correct? I mean, you get the budget and we still don't fill the offices, so I'm not assuming why there's an impression on the dais that this is in correlation with the budget. I mean, we give you the money every year and they're just you're not able to fill those offices, not to your fault, but just due to an issue with policing. Is that true?
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
That's exactly right. Last year, for example, we hired 18 officers, which is a lot for a department our size. But then we lost 18 officers, literally, and I'm not being flippant. We literally hired 18, and then 18 due to retirements and other forms of attrition, we lost. So then at the end of the year, it was a net gain of 0. We didn't lose anything, we didn't gain anything. And that's policing all over. It's not unique to Annapolis. It's literally all over the department. Much worse in a lot of places, much worse.
Thank you, Alderman Tierney.
Yeah, thank you. First an opinion and then a couple of factual questions. First, I think we're putting the chief in a very difficult position because when, as you were talking, Chief, I was looking at your budget and how you approached it, and you're very cognizant of the resources that are given to you. You don't calculate what you need in a vacuum. We ask you to be very attentive to the resources. And we're putting you in a very difficult position. And of course, any chief is going to ask for more officers. Factual, when I look at the documents that Linda, Ms. Schuett provided, a couple of things on this number. I'm led to believe that this number is just a data point and it's backed into from statistics. She has a document here where there's a whole bunch of cities listed and the numbers surprisingly vary, all the way from 1 up to our wonderful Washington, D.C., as far as a 5.7, but then you go down, I think you have them in order here. So it just tells you that there's just too many variables. But the question is ultimately, as Alderman Gay says, we have to have some kind of ordinance. And I read this as sort of the answer right in front of us on what who is this? This is it's the state of, what is this? It's based on response time. Response time. I know in looking at the fire chiefs in the budget, their performance measure is based on response time. Is there any way that your review of adequate protection can be based on response time?
Yes, ma'am. I think that when you look at response times, you have response times priority. And the example I gave Alderwoman Tierney is that literally we have code 1, and that's lights and sirens, things of an emergency nature. Life or death could occur if we don't get there very rapidly. And then we have that hubcap while I was in Mexico scenario where it's after the fact. And, the officers only there to take a report so they can make an insurance claim. So when you look at response times for the adequate public facility, my interpretation of the entire ordinance is should there be things of an emergency nature, the preservation of life first, that we have the ability to get there in a reasonable amount of time and that we won't go on record saying that somebody died or was permanently disabled because the infrastructure didn't lend to us getting there in the most expedient manner, if I'm answering your question. But I don't want to misguide. We will make a big mistake if we make response times unilaterally across the board without taking into consideration the nature of it's impossible nature of the call.
It's very difficult to equate this to a number. There's just so many variables, and this document says that there is no national standard for how many police officers cities should have per capita.
And they use cities where, if you look at it, it's not per 1,000, it's per 10,000.
Per 10,000. I was moving the decimal.
Alderman Tierney, if we can, if I may, and I just wanted to reiterate what the young lady from the Willows, just to clarify. The mitigation or the change, the temporary change will not reduce our budget, Alderman Arnett or Alderman Savage. Adding the 7 or, considering the 7 from the fire department only brings us to 131, which is the 3.2. We line item justify 124.
All right.
That's why this is all just a ridiculous
Thank you, Alderman.
conversation.
Alderman Savage, and just a couple of minutes each, please. I've got a 5 o'clock.
I'd have a suggestion on how to move forward here, because I really don't like this resolution as written. But I think building off of Ms. Schuett's point, I'm not entirely clear why we're in this situation, because as long as I've been on the council, it's always been the standard of as long as they're funded up to that level, that's all you have to do to meet the APF. But now there's questions I think about, well, that's not sufficient because really we don't have, we want the officers in that position. So I think the problem with this legislation, again, as it's written, is to point, Ms. McCoy, I disagree, because I think if you're allowing this would allow, again, the firefighters to come in to essentially lower the number of sworn police officers.
No.
We
Because
have.
it brings it to, actually, we're budgeted now for 124. We're not meeting the code, because if we met the code at 3.2 per
Then how many-
1,000, we'd be at 131.
And how many firefighters are you talking about?
7.
So that still says, the one I'm looking at for 2023, required police positions 128, actual sworn positions 124. But my point is, so it depends on how you calculate that 128. That's what I'm looking at here. But in any case, we can avoid that argument, because that is going to come up. If this passes, that reduces the number of officers we have to have. I don't think any of us want to be in the position of reducing the number of officers. So I think we should keep it as is, keep the ratio, and just instead modify. And so keep it as is. That'll say, as long as it's funded, you're good. Let's just adjust the mitigation section to say, if it's determined by the police chief that, maybe we could say, if you don't have enough officers actually in the positions, then the police chief or the city manager, in consultation with the chief, can require certain short-term mitigation efforts, be it camera, be it funding for Office of Community Carrying, be it hiring, I think I saw you mention security guard, private security, whatever. That allows you to move forward without undermining the APD's budget. I don't think you want to really do anything that might reduce the number of officers until we do the study to figure that out.
That's right.
Right? So I think the mitigation approach would be better.
And by the way, 7, it's not 7, it's 5, because 2 of those 7 is the chief that you're looking at now and the deputy chief. And like me, I'm sure their knees are not up to par and can go ahead and chase down these 16-year-olds. So it's really 5 that are really fit to do that. not Carol and
Are you counted in the 124?
yes, ma'am. But they keep saying 7 from the fire department. But of those 7, 2 of those fire marshals, one sitting right here, and his deputy chief, Carol Spriggs, is also certified as a police officer. So it really leaves 5 workhorses out there.
We did not need to hear that.
So
Thank you.
I'm going to ask.
And so we are nearly out of time. Yes, 30 seconds.
Can I just, before I yield, can I just ask Mr. Rude to draft up something along those lines for me? Because I'm not going to support this as written, but I will support adjusting the mitigation so we can get these other things. But this undermines the very purpose of what we're trying to do.
Alderman Pindell Charles, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I want to say, I might feel differently if we were looking at the end of 2022 calendar year. But as happened last year, January, February to mid-March, we had an uptick. And last weekend was not a good weekend for the city when it comes to some violent acts or some crimes going on. And so I will say, when we got to mid-March last year, then we initiated an Ambulance United, and that put the numbers in and made the adjustments. But that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at every day that daily report. And last weekend was not a good weekend at all. So if I looked at things maybe a couple of weeks ago or maybe a month and a half ago, different story. But what I saw, I'm very concerned about. And so I just want to leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So I'm going to adjourn. I just want to say to everyone, the 30-minute presentation on City Dock was because it has been presented to the Planning Commission in a pre-meeting and HPC, Historic Preservation Commission, in a pre-meeting. It was also presented to the City Dock Action Committee. I didn't want you guys to say, hey, I haven't seen it yet. So we tried to jam it in just straight after that, and we had to get it to them first to make sure they didn't tear any holes in it before we brought it to you. So I was trying to get the information to you as quick as possible after that. So I apologize for that being in here. We'll have to see if we have to drop something else, but we can take a look at it. Okay, I'm going to leave it for good order unless there's anything really an emergency.
Second.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you don't need
so
a
we don't
second.
have to do that. So I'm going to adjourn the session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you.